The 2010 Atlanta Press Club Debates, brought to you live from Georgia Public Broadcasting. Now, the race for the 12th Congressional District.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm Frank Malloy, anchor of Eyewitness News on 13 WMAZ in Macon. We'd like to welcome our viewers on television, our listeners on GPB radio, and our live studio audience to the 2010 Atlanta Press Club Debate Series originating from the studios of GPB. The debate tonight is organized by the Atlanta Press Club. This is the debate between the candidates facing each other in Georgia's 12th Congressional District. Now, the 12th Congressional District is located in southeast Georgia and includes all or portions of 22 counties. Some of the largest cities in the district are Savannah, Augusta, Statesboro, and Vidalia. Now, let's meet the candidates. They are in alphabetical order. John Barrow, the incumbent, serving his third term as the Democratic congressman from Georgia's 12th District. Congressman Barrow declined our invitation to participate in this debate, hence why he is represented, as you just saw, by the empty podium. And Ray McKinney is a mechanical services manager from Savannah, Georgia, and the Republican nominee for U.S. Congress. Our format tonight: in the first round, the candidate will answer a question from one of our three panelists. In the second round, the candidate will ask a question of his absent opponent, and in the third round, the panelists will continue questioning our candidate. Finally, the candidate will have 30 seconds in which to make a closing statement. Before we get started, let's meet our three panelists. They have been selected by the Atlanta Press Club. First, we're pleased to have with us Josephine Bennett, reporter for GPB Radio in Macon. Next, we welcome Andre Jackson, editorial editor for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And finally, our final panelist, Susan Percy. She is editor for Georgia Trend magazine. All right, now let's get started with the debate. In the first round, the candidate will be asked a question by one of our panelists. The candidate will have 60 seconds to answer the question. Josephine Bennett will ask the question of Ray McKinney. Josephine?
Mr. McKinney, in April you were interviewed and you said you wanted the U.S. to be the leader in cheap power, and that while other countries were moving ahead with this, we were going to sit around and putter and make solar panels. Are you against wind and solar to create electricity?
Well, actually, what it boils down to is I've looked at the facts. We can't build enough solar panels to produce enough power for our needs. Wind power, to throw some numbers out there, it takes almost 2 years for a windmill to generate enough electricity to replace the electricity that it took to make the windmill. Right now in the world, there are 220 nuclear power plants under construction worldwide, not being done by U.S. companies or U.S. materials. The rest of the world has figured it out. If you want to do it right, the best method out there for clean, cheap, reliable, renewable energy is nuclear power.
All right, that will conclude round one. Now time for our candidate to ask a question of his absent opponent. You will have 30 seconds for the question. All right, Mr. McKinney, you can go ahead and fire something at Mr. Barrow / empty podium.
Well, I appreciate that. John, you took money from Charlie Rangel. You took money from General Motors after you bailed them out. You voted with Nancy Pelosi 93.6% of the time. You voted for Nancy Pelosi 3 times in a row. You won't ask if you'll vote for her a 4th time in a row. Georgia's lost over 50,000 jobs in the last year. Where are you?
Now that we have that formality out of the way, we will continue with part 3, and that will be more questions from our panelists. For Mr. McKinney, we'll go with Andre Jackson with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
Mr. McKinney, Georgia's been a leader, a national leader, if you will, in bank failures. How would you come to the aid of the small banks that you speak about on your website? And a second question to that, what lines of business should those banks focus on, given that many experts say real estate will be a long time recovering, both in the commercial and in the residential sectors?
Well, what's interesting is most of the bankers that I talk to, like the bank that I bank with, Mount Vernon Bank or Southeastern Bank, which I also bank with, these lending institutions are in great shape because they followed the policies that their board set up, and they did not make loans to people who could not afford to pay them back. And what we're seeing is large failures of large banks where people got into bundling, and this was done because of federal policies that drove them into this market. And what I see happening is, once again, the federal government got involved in something that they shouldn't have been doing. They don't understand market principles, and they have destroyed this industry.
All right, next question will come from Susan Percy.
Mr. McKinney, the Port of Savannah is an important economic engine in your district, and the Port Authority believes that the harbor needs to be deepened to accommodate larger ships, and that has been on track but seems to have stalled. What would you do in Congress to help that process, or would you?
Well, I'm a firm believer in business, and right now the Georgia port, Savannah ports, is one of the greatest ports in the country. Last statistics I saw, we actually exported more than we imported out of that port. It's a very fast-growing port, and we do have to deepen the river basin. As the Panama Canal gets opened up larger and larger shipping, Savannah is prime in line to receive these ships. Now, currently, a lot of these ships are docking on the West Coast, and then they're transporting across the country on rail. So, to me, it's also not just about investing in Savannah. It's also investing in Georgia and the Southeast. It's a program that I would wholeheartedly support.
We'll continue with our questions from our panelists. Josephine, you're up next.
Mr. McKinney, you say you'd like to reduce spending in Washington. Is that across the board, and does it include military spending?
I would say it's pretty much across the board. When it comes to military spending, however, it's not that we're going to go in there and slash 10%. I want to work with the military. I want to work with the leadership, the generals, and find out exactly where we can cut costs. Like a lot of citizens, we hear things in the paper where the military was forced to buy a plane that they did not want. They were forced to buy a weapon system they did not want. If that's the case that's going on, we need to stop that. But across the board, yes, we need to cut spending. The fact is, in the last year, for every dollar the federal government spent, we've had to borrow 40 cents. What we're doing is we're selling off the future for our children and our grandchildren. It has to stop. It's going to be painful. I understand that. But unless we get people in Washington who are willing to say enough is enough, we've got to cut the spending, we have got to slow down, we've got to turn this ship around, we're going to destroy this country. It's got to stop. And somebody's got to be able to stand up and say, I'll stop it.
For those of you who may just be joining us, you're watching the debate between the candidates for Georgia's 12th Congressional District. The incumbent, John Barrow, chose not to appear, so the panelists are asking questions of his challenger, Ray McKinney. Our next question will come from Andre Jackson. Andre.
Mr. McKinney, in your view, does Georgia receive its fair share of federal transportation dollars? And a related question to that, what would be the biggest investment you would make in our transportation infrastructure? You spoke a little bit about the Savannah Harbor, but what would be the other things we should do?
Well, it brings up a good point, Andre. I mean, in one respect, you would like to bring as much money as you can for your district. But instead of talking about bringing bacon back from Washington, D.C., I say we just leave the pig here at home, and we need to keep more of our tax dollars right here, and we need to make decisions in Georgia how we're going to spend our money. You know, I see where it makes no sense that we send $1 to Washington, and 60 cents of it comes back to Georgia, with strings tied to it, telling us how we have to spend our money, how we have to educate our children, which roads we have to build. We decide we want to build these roads, but the federal fund says, no, you have to build these roads. We need to be keeping the money right here at home. My vision is a smaller, less controlling federal government that allows the states and the local communities to keep their money here and invest it where they believe it needs to be invested.
Susan Percy with Georgia Trend Magazine. You have our next question for Mr. McKinney.
Mr. McKinney, to follow up on that, where would you start specifically in making the federal government smaller?
Well, some agencies I can think of right off the bat would be the National Endowment of the Arts, for one. You know, the U.S. Constitution provides for Congress to protect artisans and skilled craftsmen in the trade, and it's a patent process. It's not to spend $50 or $100 or $500 million creating art that, quite honestly, most people don't want to buy. Let's look at the Education Department. Once again, we have a vehicle where a federal agency we're sending money to is sending it back with strings tied to it. I have literally seen school systems that were given or were going to be awarded free computers if they bought specific desks for those computers, and the cost of the desks were more than what the computers were. Those kind of strings make no sense whatsoever. We have over 300 economic development agencies within the federal government. What I would like to have is a sunset commission to where every single agency has to come before a congressional committee, prove why they should exist. If they can't make the case, they should be cut immediately.
May I follow up? As one congressman, how would you go about implementing that? How would you go about setting up the mechanisms so that those 300 economic development agencies were subject to scrutiny?
Now, here's what I see happening, and this is where I'm hoping that America's paying attention. If we turn over the House like it's projected, if we can take 70 or 80 or 90 or 100 seats, and we are all running under the same provisions of less government, less spending, less taxes, and we hold our party's feet to the fire, because if we don't, we will lose all credibility. With that kind of caucus, we can drive those changes, and we can run Washington.
Josephine Bennett, GPB Radio in Macon, will ask our next question. Josephine.
Mr. McKinney, two other Republican candidates, Austin Scott and Mike Cowan, are getting help from the National Republican Congressional Committee in the form of advertisements. Has the committee been supportive of your campaign, and what kinds of interactions have you had with the National Party?
Well, when it comes to interactions with the party, there's a lot of legalities. Thankfully, there's a lot of federal laws that you really have to watch what you can do. You cannot collude, you cannot coordinate. We just had Michael Steele down here a few weeks ago in Statesboro. We had a very large event. What we're doing, though, is we're going to win this in the district with people in this district. And that brings up a good point. When people are getting assistance from other groups, I guess there's a quid pro quo. My race is being run in the 12th by people in the 12th, and that's who I want to be beholden to, are the people in the 12th. And when the people in Washington come and say, Ray, we need you to do this because we're going to help you get back in office, I can look them dead in the eye and say, no, the 12th is my home. These people got me in the office. They can take me out of office. That's who I owe my allegiance to.
Andre Jackson, editorial editor for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Our next question, please.
Mr. McKinney, what's your view of the emerging common guidelines, if you will, that are arising in education, things such as the Common Core standards that the National Governors Association has been involved with? Are you opposed to them, in favor of, or neutral?
Well, Andre, I'll be quite honest with you. That's not a topic that I'm exactly well versed in. You know, once again, I said my job as a U.S. Congressman, the way I feel it should be done is we should be running the business of Washington, D.C., running the business of our government, not be educating our children back at home. That should be done at the community and state level. We should not be managing Georgia's water from the federal level. That should be a Georgia's decision. You know, we are there to protect this country. We're there to create an environment where jobs can grow, where businesses can expand and prosper. It's not to tell us how to live our lives.
Susan Percy, Georgia Trend Magazine. Our next question.
Mr. McKinney, on the topic of jobs, which I think just about everyone agrees is crucial to Georgia's economy, what specifically would you do once you got to Washington to encourage job growth in Georgia?
Well, that's interesting because we just put out, we'll be putting out tomorrow a 19-page jobs plan as part of our website, and a shot of it right here. Like I said, I come from a working environment. I come from nuclear power. I come from power industry, the chemical industry, the pulp and paper industry, worked at Gulfstream Aerospace. I come from the job side. I know how jobs are created. And what you do is you create an environment where there's a need for a product. You create that product. You provide that service. You make a profit. You know, I worked for a man that came from East Germany before there was a wall. There were no government regulations telling him how to build his business, and he turned a small company into a multi-million-dollar business because he provided a service that was needed. Specifically, I would do everything possible to get construction at Plant Vogel in Waynesboro, Georgia. That would create $250,000 a day in local revenues. That's a multi-billion-dollar project. We're talking thousands of long-term, high-paying jobs, and I would do everything possible to create environments where other businesses can grow and can expand, not just in the 12th, but in this country.
Our final candidate question will come from Josephine Bennett, GPB Radio in Macon. Josephine.
Mr. McKinney, you've also said that you would vote against any regulation that would cost money or jobs or those that could hurt small businesses. Does that include reducing environmental controls for things like power companies to make it easier for them?
Interesting point. What we were talking about is right now the EPA, OSHA, and other organizations can make a regulation that costs businesses tens to hundreds of millions of dollars, and they can do that on their own. What we support is legislation that any regulation they come up with that costs American business more than $100 million a year has to have congressional approval to do so. Because quite honestly, if they're going to pass a regulation, like say cap and trade, I am wholeheartedly, totally against cap and trade. It's an energy tax. It serves no purpose. It's not going to cause any reductions in greenhouse gases. You want to reduce greenhouse gases? Put up 100 nuclear power plants, cut greenhouse gases by 80%. That's how you solve problems, not by putting legislation out there. So what I want to do is have the authority to be able to look at those regulations and say, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense.
All right, we have wrapped up our panelist questions. That means we now are ready for our closing statements in the debate for the 12th Congressional District. All right, Mr. McKinney, you have 30 seconds to close with.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate the opportunity here. And to those in the audience, Thomas Jefferson once said, America is not ruled by the majority. It's ruled by the majority that participates. Now, we're talking about the number of people that vote, the number of the people that get involved. This is your country. I listened to a radio ad this morning where a gentleman could tell me when the first BCS game was played and who won it, but he can't tell you who the vice president was in that year. We need to be involved. You need to participate. If you believe in what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now is what you want for the future of your children and your grandchildren, stay at home, don't vote. If you don't like what's going on, vote for Ray McKinney November 2nd. Thank you and have a blessed day.
As a reminder, our incumbent Congressman John Barrow declined our invitation for this debate. And that concludes this debate. A reminder that the general elections Tuesday, November 2nd, not that far off. Early voting is ongoing right now. We certainly want to thank candidate Mr. McKinney. Thank you very much. Josephine Bennett, Andre Jackson, Susan Percy, we certainly appreciate you taking time to be our panelists. We also, of course, want to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging this debate. For more information about the Atlanta Press Club, you may visit atlantapressclub.org. The debates that air on Georgia Public Broadcasting will be archived on the Press Club's website. Now, this broadcast has been streamed live and will be available on demand on GPB's website, gpb.org. I'm Frank Malloy. Thanks very much for joining us for this general election debate. Take care.
The Atlanta Press Club Debate Series is made possible in part by donations from the late Tom Watson Brown and Emory University.